Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here tonight for this planning seminar. You all know me, I'm Pastor Brian, and Eric Baumann is over there. Our order for things tonight is I will just take and kind of run through some funeral service, funeral preparation things when it comes to the spiritual side, the worship side, and Eric will more take care of the final arrangement side and those types of things. So what I have for us today is, first of all, remembering that when we are called home, it is a precious time. Okay, it's a precious time, first of all, for the Lord. And the Lord says, precious in His sight are the death of His saints. It's a precious time because the Lord, who is faithful to His promise, has kept His promise to bring another one of His sons or daughters home to eternal glory. It's a precious time for you or me when the Lord calls us, because we finally get to be with Jesus, the one who has prepared heaven for us, to see the one who knows us completely and yet loves us, saved us, to be in His presence forever. And it's a precious time for our families and loved ones as well, a time for them to pause and reflect and remember God's grace in their loved one's life and God's grace in their own life. Now, let's face it, with how fast-paced our world is, how everyone is, go, 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 and we all have places to go and things to do. The death of a loved one is one of the few times that people now actually stop their, press pause on their life and actually think, well, what is this life actually all about? And this is also a precious time when it comes to you being able to give one final testimony to those beloved family and friends about the faith, love, and the hope of the resurrection that you have in Jesus Christ. Now, the tendency when someone is called home and the funeral service is going on, it's a stressful time. It's a time when people's emotions are running high. And naturally, people are going to want to focus on the one that they've lost temporarily. And they're going to want to idolize that person, memorialize them, and say, Dad was the best dad ever, and Mom was just wonderful, and all the things that she baked, and Dad was a pro golfer, and all these wonderful things about that person, which is fine, and that's going to happen naturally. But when those things become the focus, what gets shoved in the background? The thing that we as Christians want to focus on the most and want them to focus on the most, especially at a time like that. We want Jesus and His grace and the comfort of His resurrection to shine through. And when you take the time to pre-plan these things for your loved ones, you can then intentionally direct the focus off of you and to your Savior, Jesus. And this can also be one of those wonderful acts of love that you do. So that the time that is, crunch time, where there's important decisions that have to be made and someone's got to make them, and emotions are running high, and this can easily happen in even the best of families. When you pre-plan some of these things, you can take some of that pressure off and let it be a special time for them, a precious time to be at peace, to be comforted, to grieve, and to bond with your family and friends. Some things that you can do to help prepare yourself. One of them I would suggest is writing your own obituary. Now, I know that might sound morbid to some or make some people uncomfortable to do so, but no one knows your life better than you. And again, when these things are left to kids, the tendency is going to be to say, well, I'm going to write about how Dad went to high school, and he went to college, and he worked 25 years in blank industry, and he rose the ranks, and so on. Instead, when we write our own obituary, we can make sure that the focus stays where our folks of our lives have been, our Savior, Jesus, and how he has been good to us. You can, then, in that obituary, include meaningful milestones. Yes, graduation, college. But let's not forget other important milestones. Things like your baptism date, your baptism verse, your confirmation verse, confirmation date. How many of you guys know your baptism date? All right. If you don't know that off the top of your head, that may be something you want to find and write down so that then it can be with your other things so that your family knows that. Because if you don't know it, good luck them trying to find it in, 2.5 days, okay, when they have a whole bunch of other things to go around. And that baptism gives us such comfort, right? Because in baptism, we are connected with the life and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Other things, and this is maybe just a practical thing, not a spiritual thing, but getting a good photo. Many of us here, myself included, aren't necessarily people who are taking selfies every 5 minutes. And people say, well, I wish I had a good photo for my obituary. But you've got to crop or you've got to zoom, we've got to zoom in and it's all blurry. Maybe it's you might be a time in life where you say, hey, I just want to have a nice, formal portrait of just me. And that can be something I can leave with these things and with my family. When it comes to the actual funeral service itself, there's not necessarily a whole lot to it in terms of your planning, but there's some things you can do to make it really meaningful and personal. One thing is, choosing scriptures that are meaningful to you, scriptures that have been your comfort and your go-to in life. If you're saying, well, Pastor, I don't know where to begin with that, where should I start? Well, in the front of the red hymnal, so original Christian worship, on pages 148 and 149, there are just several passages there that focus on these types of things: sickness, death, the promise of the resurrection, and comfort, and so on. So that can be a place to look. Or, you can just ask me. Say, Pastor, there's a particular verse that I like. It goes something like, chances are we can work together and we will find it. All right? And choosing those scriptures can be so meaningful for your family and friends. They don't have to guess and be like, well, what would Dad have wanted? Or what would Mom have wanted? Or what was her favorite verse? I don't know. I think it was... I think of Dean Laren, for example. He took and chose all the scripture readings for his funeral. Okay? And what a powerful testimony that is to family and friends of his faith. And also, you can take and pick your favorite hymns and songs. Those parts of the hymnal that are, Easter or Saints Triumphant or Hope and Comfort, those sections of the hymnal, you can find many of your ones that people typically think of for these occasions. And this, by choosing these songs, it also helps when it comes to planning. Otherwise, you get where your kids come and they think, well, Dad's favorite song was from Guns N' Roses. Pastor, can we have that be, the after sermon song, maybe? That avoids that for me, where I don't have to break the news to them that, no, we're not going to be doing Guns N' Roses in the middle of our church service. So when you've chosen it, they have to honor your wishes. You can pick out your bulletin cover then. That's a powerful message, takes and says, hey, this is what I want you to think of, or a scripture that is comforting to you. You can set the tone then for your funeral too. Do you want it to be something that is reflective, peaceful? Do you want it to be something that is more, let's say, triumphant and joyous? That's part of that message that you send as well. And I would encourage all of you, just to simply schedule time with me. Get your family together. I am available pretty much whenever. To do this kind of planning doesn't take long. It maybe takes, if we really work at half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, okay? Doesn't take a super long time. And the blessing of us doing this beforehand is I get to meet, hopefully, your children too. I mean, I've been here 12 years, so I know most of you and most of your kids, but not necessarily all. And this makes it so much more meaningful when the time comes to be like, hey, this is Pastor Brian, whom I've at least talked to before, who I can pick out of a crowd, and I can look at them and say, hey, that's Mark, and I've met him before, and he has 2 kids. Or I can just plain know how many kids you actually have. Because there are times when I go into it and I say, well, is that one of his children? Is that one of her children? So all these things can be very helpful and make the transition easier for everyone involved, make things less awkward and just more peaceful and relaxed. Does anyone have any questions on like those kinds of things? Funeral preparations, funeral arrangements? In terms of how those things are, if people are wondering, like, well, cost-wise, we usually just pay the organist what I suggested he or she would get paid, what we pay a typical organist on a Sunday, which is around $90. For me, I do it for free, if you will, and if people want to give, they can. They don't have to. I just consider that a service of my being a pastor for you. Any other questions on any of those types of things? Yes, Deb.
Just one question with regard to the family. Like, what if they just don't like the idea of doing that? Or, how do you assure them that it's really important to you? Or how do you address their concerns?
If they wouldn't like the idea of sitting down and going through these things, I guess I would say to them, I can quote nothing better than what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, that death is the destiny of every man, and the living should take this to heart. And better to go into a house of mourning than to go into a house of feasting. So, I mean, unless someone has an in and, a little birdie comes by and says, Judgment Day is going to be tomorrow, and I wouldn't listen to that birdie because Jesus says no one knows, so you can dismiss that birdie. But unless someone knows, we all have to be prepared any moment to be with the Lord. So it's only prudent to do so. And like I said, this is you or whoever showing your children an act of love. Do you want to do this in the 2.5 days that you have to figure this out? Or do you want to do this now when you're calm, collected, and we're thinking about it and doing what's best? Anything else? All right, I've warmed them up for you here.
All right. Pastor Brian, everybody. All right. I'll tell you, Pastor was not lying about that Guns N' Roses thing. I asked him ahead of time if he would let me, during the introductions, run down to Sweet Child of Mine. It was a hard pass. So, yeah, he was telling the truth. Guys, my name is Eric Baumann. I am from Washburn-McReavy Funeral Chapels. Can everybody hear me okay?
I don't know if your mic's on.
That's green.
Okay, it's on.
Is that better? Okay. So, first of all, I want to thank you guys for braving the Minnesota chilly weather tonight and making it out here.
He'll turn it down back there.
How's that sound? Is there a speaker I should be avoiding at all, or
No, he'll get it. They're behind you.
give it up for Stu? Yeah. All right. My name is Eric Baumann. I am ecstatic to be here tonight. I actually grew up the son of a Wisconsin Synod Lutheran pastor myself. Pastor Norris Baumann. We served in South Dakota. He served in Nebraska. I'm a product of Zion Lutheran Grade School. Right before high school, I went to Luther High School in Onalaska, Wisconsin. So I thank you for having me here tonight. I'm tickled pink for the opportunity, and I speak your language. I speak hope of the resurrection. Absolutely. So we're talking about death tonight. Not everyone's favorite topic to discuss. That's why I thought maybe we would just kind of loosen the mood a little bit and start with a little bit of trivia, okay? First question. Actually, let's go back here. A little bit of housekeeping first of all. If you guys see your folders right here, I've got a form in the back, and it's a family planning ahead form. I would kindly ask that all of you guys just take a minute and fill this out for me, all right? The information's not going to be shared with, the big public database or anything like that. This is all going to be in my Rolodex, so if anyone would like to communicate with me at some point, I know how to get a hold of you, that's all. But there are, questions about your level of current funeral planning, what you know about yourselves right now, what you don't know, what you have and what you do not have. And if you are interested in moving forward with something like this at some point, this will give me a good kind of starting point, all right? So, back to the trivia. Which celebrity's funeral tickets were scalped for more than $10,000? Was it Michael Jackson? Was it the King? Was it our hometown hero Prince? Or was it John Lennon? Anybody care to take a guess?
Presley.
I heard Prince. It was not Prince.
Michael Jackson.
It was Michael Jackson. Yeah, it was Michael Jackson. Anybody watch his funeral on TV? Yeah, you did. Same. I did too. Yeah. Prior to doing.
I didn't have that kind of money.
Yeah. No. Yeah, he had his tickets. He had his funeral at the Staples Center, where the Los Angeles Lakers and the Clippers play. I think Aretha Franklin played. Beyonce. Who else was there? Stevie Wonder was there. Yeah, I was actually a 15-year radio vet. That's what I did before I did this. I hosted some morning shows here in the Twin Cities that some of you might have listened to. So, of course, I had to watch the Michael Jackson funeral and be up on that. Number 2, who owns the plot next to Marilyn Monroe? Was it Joltin' Joe DiMaggio? Was it Madonna? Was it Hugh Hefner? Or was it John F. Kennedy? What was that? I heard Hugh Hefner. That's correct. Yeah, he purchased the plot next to Marilyn Monroe for $75,000. So I think it's pretty safe to say he was a creep in life and in death. So I got another trivia question for you. Does anybody know which year Minnesota became a state? 1848. Not 1851. 1848. Not 1848. 1858. That's correct. And the reason I bring that number up is because in 1857, Washburn-McReavy Funeral Chapels opened up their very first chapel. All right, so the way this kind of worked was back in the 1800s, people would have big giant homes. They'd have a big room in the front, which they referred to as the funeral parlor. That's where they'd have visitations. They'd put fly nets over the deceased overnight, so things have changed quite a bit. But who better to make your casket than the local furniture maker? So it was Washburn Brothers Furniture and undertakers. They were called undertakers at the time. But eventually the undertaking business took off. Mr. Washburn took on his nephew, Donald McReavy. So that was generation 2. Generation 3 was Bill McReavy Sr. If you guys have ever had Washburn-McReavy at a funeral home, you might have met Bill Sr. He's 95 years old. He still throws on the suit. He's still involved. Bill and Cindy, generation 4, they're his kids. They run the operation. They have sons, John and Jordan, who are generation 5. And John had a baby about a year ago, and the jury's still out if he's going to be generation 6. But we've been locally owned and family operated since the very beginning, and we have 19 chapels throughout the Twin Cities. Now, I do want to be crystal clear here tonight. I'm not here to solicit for Washburn-McReavy. I'm here for community outreach here this evening, and I'm not asking for Ascension to become an official church of Washburn-McReavy. But it's where I work. It's where I've spent my entire career in the funeral industry, and a lot of the answers and things we'll be going over here tonight are from that perspective. So I want to start this conversation here tonight by getting you guys to start thinking about events that you have in your life that are absolutely life-altering, all right? Perhaps you've planned a wedding before. It looks like most of you all have been a part of one of those. Deaths, of course, the birth of a child, injury, job loss, job gain, job promotion, war, moves, vacations, graduations. We've all experienced some of those to some degree. So I want to kind of hone this in on one event right now. Anybody remember what the city skyline of New York looked like before the World Trade Centers went down? All right. So I chose this slide, and I kind of chose this theme to start here with tonight because this was a loss that all of us had experienced, right? This is one that we've all kind of experienced, this loss collectively. And trust me, by the time I get to slide 3, you probably are going to know, yeah, I know where he's going with this, and you're right. But anybody remember where they were when they heard the news about 9/11? Yeah, that's not one that anybody forgets, right? For those of you unfamiliar with that right there, that was President George W. Bush. He was speaking at a small elementary school, and when he received the news from one of his aides, you just see that look of shock on his face. Who did you call, right? When we experience shocking news, we're not calling Ghostbusters. We're calling friends. We're calling family. We want to know what they heard. We want to share the news that we have. When did you see? Everybody remember, unless you were on a mission trip or you're up at the Boundary Waters, simply hearing the news about 9/11 wasn't enough, right? You needed to go to a TV. You needed to see Dan Rather doing his thing and really just sort of. I still haven't gotten over it. It was a weird day. It was a weird time. We gathered nationally, church attendance, as we all remember, spiked. We gathered locally. I remember when 9/11 happened. I was 23 or 24 years old. I was 24 at that time. I was 24. I was a super senior at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. And I remember my first thought was, gas prices are going to go up, right? So I got in my 1989 Oldsmobile Buick and I drove over to the Holiday Station. And sure enough, I wasn't the only person who had that idea. There were about 500 cars there. And everyone's just like, did you hear it? Where were you when you heard it? Oh, I heard it was, it was, everyone just wanted to make sense of it. Everyone wanted to connect on a local level. And, we all reflected on what was lost. My first thing was the gas station. But I'm sure some people were thinking, am I going to get to go on the plane? I've got a son in the military. Is he going to get deployed somewhere? We're reflecting on what was lost and what that means to us personally. And then, after the dust sort of kind of began to settle, we celebrated as a nation. Anybody remember that first New York Yankee game that was played right after 9/11? Bush came and threw out the opening pitch. It was the most televised game in Major League Baseball history at the time. And I think it really helped us, wrap our heads around what's happening and know that life does have a chance of getting back to normal at some point, right? So the reason I took you all through this, I'm sure you had picked up on it quickly, was that one day your friends and family are going to have their own personal 9/11 experience when they lose you. So a lot of people think, when they're thinking about their own death and pre-planning their funeral, that they just need to decide, we've got plots out at so-and-so cemetery. I just need to decide if we're going to be buried or cremated, and maybe talk to pastor, get some hymns and script. We're good. I'm here to tell you I do two things at Washburn-McReavy. I'm in community outreach. I do advanced funeral planning. I also, anybody know where Glen Haven Cemetery is? So that's where I office out of. I'm at the Glen Haven Chapel in the Glen Haven Memorial Gardens on West Broadway in Crystal. So I do the pre-arranging, and then myself and 2 gals manage that cemetery as well. And I'll tell you, who here's planned a funeral before? Who's kind of been the point person running a funeral for somebody? Okay. And did these people have pre-arrangements, or they did? Okay. Well, I'll tell you, when I work with people on the cemetery side of things who don't have a pre-arrangement, it's shock. Their emotions are raw. And on average, people are going to be your family one day without a pre-arrangement is going to be faced with 75 to 125 different transactional conversations. 75 to 125 opportunities for grieving people to think they're getting nickeled and dimed by a funeral director. There's a lot that goes into this. And that's why at Washburn-McReavy, we like to educate people on what's referred to as the acute loss period. So the acute loss period is that time when you first hear about somebody's death. That's up here at the top of the key, all the way around to when the actual onset of grief sets in. The 5 stages of grief. We've got denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. And I'll tell you, in this period right here, you might experience the first 2, but it's important that we understand the psychology of grief when we look at this as well. For most people, it takes anywhere between 3 months and 3 years to get through all 5 of those stages of grief. But every one of these stages of the acute loss period, excuse me, I'm going to grab a sip of water here. So every one of them kind of relates to that little 9/11 journey that we took you guys on. So you hear the news. You hear the news about a loved one's death, and that first feeling is shock. Whether they were 9 or 99 years old, whether it was expected or unexpected, that first feeling is pure shock, right? Your world is about to change. You've had your last dinner at Golden Corral with your wife. You've went to your last ball game with Dad. It's shock. And naturally, when we hear bad news, we share. I think of just about any death I've ever experienced in my life. I probably reach out to 100 people or so. For me, my logic behind that is the more people I reach out to, the wider net I cast, and the greater chance I have of somebody, maybe saying something that's going to comfort me and give me hope for the resurrection. Now, that first question that we usually get when we share the news about somebody's death is, when can I see you? And when can I see my loved one final time? Which is really code for, when is the funeral? And is there going to be an open casket? I work over at the funeral home, and that mood is always so somber when I walk in. It's so somber, nobody knows what to say. And then that all changes when we get kind of to the end. When we get to the luncheon afterwards, that's where I kind of have to shut my door. That's where the belly laughs start to happen. That's where, you hear 50 different people say, why do we only get together at funerals? But at that point, that mood is somber. So I want to pause here for a second when we, on this topic of seeing. In the United States, I think we can all remember when cremation was kind of a weird thing that nobody did, right? That's not the case anymore. 56% of people in the United States are cremating, and in the state of Minnesota, that number is approaching 80% right now. I think a lot of us don't want to be outside for a committal service when it's 40 degrees below zero. A lot of us, have friends or relatives, or maybe you guys snowbird to Arizona, Florida, California. It offers convenience. In most cases, cremation is a little bit cheaper. You have flexibility with burial, but a very important step in the grieving process can get skipped sometimes. What's your name again? Sheila, right? Sheila. What kind of car do you drive? Huh? Chevy Cobalt? All right, so if I told you I just saw a Chevy Cobalt explode in the parking lot, you're not just going to calmly grab your phone and call Jake from State Farm and come back to your seminar, are you? No, you're going to hightail it out there. You're going to want to see it for yourself. And the same thing kind of happens with death. You know, if we don't get a chance to see our loved one one final time, if we don't get to touch them, talk to them, and see that was once a vessel for their soul, but now their soul is with Jesus and they're perfect, we can skip a real important part of that closure. Has anybody ever been a part of a cremation where there was a private family viewing? So a private family viewing in cremation cases, it's very, very inexpensive. In this case, you or your loved one would be washed, disinfected. Your family could bring in some clothes if you want, and then the funeral home would take one of the small rooms and kind of turn it into a small visitation room for your friends and family. All right? At Washburn-McReavy, it's an additional $295. Then after the family's had that opportunity, then your loved one is cremated, and you can go on with the funeral planning. All right? We have another option too. And again, what I'm saying here, every family funeral home in town, any full-service funeral home that has a family name on the front of it does something like this. We also offer what's called the full-service cremation. This would be for someone who wanted to have their body present for a public viewing at a visitation or a Christian funeral service. In that case, the remains are embalmed, dressed, makeup, hair, clothed. And funeral homes have what are called ceremonial caskets, which are, just a fancy term for rental caskets. But that's an option. And then after the funeral service, your loved one is cremated. So even though it's if the choice is cremation, there are still options for your loved ones to get that closure. Another thing that can happen with this flexibility of cremation is, well, we've got kids studying abroad in Costa Rica. We'll do something when they can come back home. We've got, grandparents who are down in Florida, Arizona. We'll do something when they can come home. Well, it didn't work out where we could all get together this year, so we'll do something next year, and next year, and next year. And what ends up happening is, for a lot of people, they just have an urn sitting on a mantle, at the next house and the next house, and then the next generation has it in a closet, and then 2 generations down the road, there's an urn with no final resting place, maybe at a Goodwill. I say Goodwill because I saw one there one time. All right? When a family has a funeral service, when they have a gathering, Christian like ours or not Christian, it gives the family an opportunity to answer questions about your death. It gives the family a chance to hear stories about their loved one, to have hope, to have some laughs, to get answers. And questions about your death, whether you have a funeral or not, are going to happen. If you don't have a service or a gathering of some kind, they will happen, but they'll happen unexpectedly and awkwardly at work, school, church, the gym, the pickleball court. When a family has a funeral service, they're saying, yes, I want to hear the word sympathy and condolences over and over again. I want to hear stories about mom. I want to hear stories about dad. And we've decided as a family from 11 to 2 on Thursday, we're going to do it, The connecting and the reflecting. Pastor Brian really hit the nail on the head here. It's a gift that you give your family. It's one final stamp of approval on your legacy, your love for Jesus, your hope for Christ, your hope for heaven. And if you've ever left a funeral before, besides that kind of hope, we all kind of leave doing some self-reflection too. When you leave a funeral, you're reminded of all of the beautiful roses God put in front of you. You leave that place like, I'm not going to put work ahead of my kids anymore. I'm not going to put work ahead of my marriage. I'm not going to work an extra shift and miss my kids' play. No, I'm gonna stop and smell some of those roses that God gave me. And then, like I said, that celebration, that funeral luncheon, that really gives your family a great chance to end things on a really, really good day. Take a bad day and end it on a high note. So if this is a slide right here, and I don't always know how to handle this one when I come to a church. I also do these out at the Crystal Legion and senior living centers and so on, and we want to educate people on the fact that you're not going to be at your funeral service. In my little world, I used to always look at a funeral, I'd see it as me up in the church balcony, with a little disguise on and my glasses and my hat, kind of taking attendance as to who was going to be there, and making sure they played Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses, and the pastor hit my scripture on the head. But I'm really not going to be there. My body will be perfect, my soul will be perfect, and I will be with Jesus. But so when it comes to all your little nitpicky wishes about what everybody wears and where you're buried and all that kind of stuff, that it isn't really about what you want. You need to keep in mind kind of what your family wants. I grew up in the Lutheran Church. To me, my funeral was always going to be a casket with a viewing, a hopeful message, a burial at a cemetery, and a final resting place. But when I really, talked this over with my wife, she doesn't want that at all. She sees the importance of a viewing, but she wants an urn. She wants to connect with me. She wants to talk to me. She wants to yell at me. She wants all of those things with an urn. So those are things that I need to really keep in mind. So it is important that you talk to your kids. Because of sin, death, and the devil, dealing with grief isn't going to be an easy task. And there are things that you can do for them to help them, and planning ahead will do something like that for them. But you want to make sure that you're nurturing their emotional, spiritual, and relational needs. So I've got 5 common reasons that people plan ahead. Number 1, urgent tasks and decisions are handled ahead of time. I mentioned, without a prearrangement, your loved ones are going to be sitting in a funeral director's office arrangement room, faced with 75 to 125 different transactional conversations. What was mom's social security number? What town was your dad born in? Are there any veterans in the room tonight? Thank you for your service. It was Mike, right? Yes. All right, yeah, thank you for your service. Do you know where your DD-214 form is? I do. You do? Do your kids know where it is? Yes. They do? Okay, bad example. A lot of families won't know that stuff. I've had people, we've asked for the DD-214 form, and it's at my dad's house somewhere. He's a hoarder. Well, looks like you're going to be dealing with the first part of your grief, going through a hoard trying to find these kinds of things. Or sitting in line at Hennepin County, or sitting on hold with so-and-so, hitting 1, hitting 2. It's not something you want your family to go through. It eliminates doubts. I think of myself, I've got this 9-year-old boy who is a carbon copy of me, kind of an overthinker, empathetic, sappy. He'll probably be, work in the funeral industry like me one day. I've been on daddy-daughter, father-son road trips now with all 3 of my kids. And, when I talked to him one day, he asked me, and I said, I want the casket. I want the service at the church. I want the final resting place. So he'll remember that. Now, if I'm talking to my 18-year-old daughter who's cut from her mom's cloth, specifically in the worry about money category, I told Avery, if something like that happened to me when I'm the primary breadwinner of the family, just cremate me, keep it cheap, take 20 people over to the Olive Garden, let pastor come and say a couple words, and just keep it simple. Now, if I'm talking to my 16-year-old son, you ever try to talk to a teenage boy about something serious? Yeah. No, it doesn't. No. Then my inner child comes out and we deflect to jokes, and that's exactly what happened the one time him and I talked about it. And I told him what I used to tell my friends when I was younger. I want to be cremated, and I'm a big baseball fan. I want to be launched out of a cannon at Target Field, and I want to get shot over the center field fence, and I want to die hitting one final home run. I probably really don't want that. But now fast forward hopefully 40 years down the road, and these are 50, 60-year-old kids sitting in a funeral director's office, and funeral director asks, what did your dad want? Well, he said casket. No, he said Olive Garden. No, he said the thing about Target Field, and I've spent the last 30 years putting that together. And now they're butting heads. You know, my dad sent me something. Everyone's dad sends them something all the time. And you know, just like every industry, we have funeral nerd podcasts, and he sent me one, and it talked about doubt spending. Something that will happen when a kid goes to a funeral home when their parents die and they don't know what dad or mom might have wanted. They go into dad and mom deserve the best mode. So then they go and spend $19,000 on the bronze Michael Jackson casket. We do have one of them at our Edina Chapel, by the way, if you want to check it out. Or they do, instead of a hearse, they do a white, horse-drawn carriage, and they just overspend. You guys are all called to be stewards of your money, and that's something that you've taught your kids to do. You don't want them going into debt over a one-day funeral. When your final wishes are all in one place, they see what you really wanted and the stewards of money that you truly were. I think peace of mind goes without saying. I think all of you are here tonight because there's some curiosity, and as you age, that curiosity will keep growing and growing. I've done hundreds of prearrangements for families now, and I'll tell you, it's you can feel 50 pounds of emotional and stress weight being just lifted off their shoulders when they do this. Family can be with each other. If they are fighting over, Michael Jackson caskets and cannon launchings at Target Field and stuff like that, or they're fighting over money. I've got this sister who hit it big in the multi-level marketing game. She makes 3 times what I make. I could see myself, when my mind isn't working correctly in a time of raw emotion and grief, me saying, why don't you pay for it? Why should I have to pay for it? So now these siblings are fighting over something, and we're not leaning on each other. We're not leaning into the Lord. We're not focusing on celebrating our loved one's life. We're arguing. We've turned it. We're splitting up errands at Hennepin County and DD 214 forms, and who goes to Michael's and picks out whatever, and this isn't a wedding. This is a funeral. This is celebrating our loved ones' lives. And another awesome thing about this, too, is that you can make sure that these costs are addressed ahead of time. All right? When you prearrange today, you actually lock in today's prices for the rest of your living years. And we do that through what is called a funeral pre-need policy. There was once a day when someone would go to the funeral home and prearrange. They get all their final wishes in one place, and they'd slide a big pile of cash or a check, across the table, and really just put their faith in the funeral home that they would do right by them. And 99% of the time, that would happen. But perhaps you've seen stories on the news back in the day where a funeral home went through a drought. A drought in our industry is when nobody's passing away, and there's a funeral director's salary that needs to get paid, and there's a hearse that needs a new transmission, and sometimes these pre-need funds would get dipped into, and then the family did not have a good experience when their loved one actually passed. In 1985, the Federal Trade Commission put the kibosh on that and replaced it with a very consumer-friendly law. They set it up where all families who prearrange their funerals are required to hold their money through a third party in their name. And funeral homes do that through a funeral pre-need policy. In other terms, it's a small, whole-term life insurance policy where the funeral home is named as the primary beneficiary. So, first of all, it guarantees the cost. The average funeral today in 2024 costs an individual about $10,000. If you live 40 more years, that's going to be about $90,000 with inflation, without a prearrangement. With a prearrangement in place, it guarantees the cost for the rest of your life. Your funds are protected. Has anybody ever have a loved one pass after they spent their last 10 years in a memory care facility or a nursing home, or perhaps lots of medical expenses because there was cancer and chemo and so on and so forth? Those things get expensive. You'll hear stories all the time of someone who was a great steward of their money, invested, saved, and they ended up dying penniless. Anybody have a life insurance policy? Something interesting about a life insurance policy in the funeral world realm is that life insurance policies don't always pay out immediately. A funeral home is going to require that funds are secured in order to begin the process. And if you have to wait 3, 6, 8 months for a life insurance policy to kick in, you've got kids footing bills, you've got kids pulling out 19% interest credit cards to make this happen. But in this case, your funds are protected from Medicare, Medicaid, the state, and the county. Nobody can touch them. It's transferable. So I mentioned earlier that with this pre-need policy, the primary beneficiary is named as the funeral home. If you were to come and prearrange with me today, we wouldn't actually name Washburn-McReavy Glen Haven Chapel in Crystal, Minnesota as the primary beneficiary. We would actually name any funeral home as its interest may appear. So if you're thinking to yourself, maybe I want to move to California someday, maybe I want to move to Connecticut and be closer to my grandkids, maybe I take a call to another congregation someday, these funds are transferable to anywhere you go, so they're very flexible. You can pay over time. So if you were to, learn that your funeral bill will just say the average $10,000, you could pay it off all at once and be done with it, but because it's an insurance policy, you can actually pay 3-year premiums, 5-year monthly premiums, 10-year monthly premiums. You can even stretch it out to 20-year monthly premiums to invest your money in other things and spend it on life and have that protection at the same time. And you actually have coverage while you're paying. So if you were to pass away before your, let's say, $10,000 bill was paid off, the rest of the balance is forgiven and your family owes nothing. In fact, I had a couple in their 60s prearranged with me about 8 months ago. They were in great health, and 3 months later, they're in their early 60s. 3 months later, the Lord called the gentleman home, unexpected, with a heart attack. He had made 3 monthly payments of approximately $150, and the rest of his balance was forgiven. His family owed nothing. He got a $10,000 funeral for about $450 or so. Now, while all of those reasons I just listed are a fantastic, reason to justify prearranging from a financial standpoint and from a convenience standpoint, you still need to remember that the absolute single most important reason that you're doing this is to take that burden off of your loved ones, all right? So they don't have to worry about that kind of stuff at the time of your passing and deal with 75 to 125 different transactional conversations. Eric, what happens if I die if I'm away from home? What happens if I'm in Las Vegas and I pass away? What happens if I'm on a cruise or I'm out in California and I pass away unexpectedly? The funeral policy alone is going to cover that funeral wherever you're living at that time. But, let's say you were in Las Vegas and you passed away. Could they cremate you in Las Vegas and you can get shipped back here in the front seat of your Honda or on a carry-on? Absolutely, absolutely. But if you're going to have an open casket, or even if you're going to be cremated and you want to give your family back in Minnesota the opportunity to have that private family viewing or a public viewing, it would cost anywhere between $5,000 and $7,000 to ship your remains back here to Minnesota. So our plans all include the option, and I say option because you don't have to take it. I don't recommend the out-of-area travel protection to somebody in hospice or a nursing home, but for everybody healthy that's in this room right now, we offer SEPIOGuard out-of-area travel protection. You can pass away wherever, and any of those additional shipping costs for a one-time fee of $499 are forgiven. All right? So this is our final wishes organizer. You will see here that I don't have a stack of these to hand out to you right now. The Final Wishes organizer is really something that you would get when you come to the funeral home. You know, whether it's Washburn-McReavy, Geardy, Delmore, Gill Brothers, whatever, they're all going to have something like this. If I handed one of these out to all of you right now, you would just get home and be like, this is just a bunch of brochures and a price list. And that's what it does start out as. But as we sit down and we fill out your memorial guide and we look at every aspect of your funeral and how much it would cost, and I want to pause for a second, and I want to talk about something else. As far as that policy, I kind of forgot to mention this. You can put cash advance items in there for all of those unexpected things. Does anybody own burial space right now? You own burial space. All right. Were you aware that when you pass away, there are going to be expenses out at the cemetery? They're nodding their head? Okay, yes. There are. You know, over at Glenhaven, for example, you might own a plot. You might have been inherited a plot. If you would like to bury a casket in that plot, it's going to cost you approximately $1,995 to open and close the grave. You know, if you're going to be cremated, to dig a cremation grave, it's approximately $1,200 to do that. There's some sticker shock with families when it comes to that. You could put that money into the pre-need policy. Food, you know, if you're going to have 200 people at your funeral and you want, you know, sandwiches, chips, potato salad, coffee, tea, lemonade, and milk for everybody, that's going to run about $10 a head. And I'm not sure, what is your church, does your church serve food for people and provide it, or do the families bring the food in?
We haven't done that for about probably close to a decade or so. So pretty much families bring in their main meal. Sometimes we'll ask people if they want to bring like bars, desserts, and so on to do that part of it. But the main meal is expected to be
Brought in by the family. All right, so that can get pretty pricey. You can put money aside for the food. You can put money aside for the flowers. You can put money aside for the clergy honorarium, you know. You can, all kinds of stuff like that. And what's nice about the policy too, I'll get back to this. What's nice about that, the flexibility of that policy is, you know, let's say you put $500 in there for the obituary, and you decided, oh, my funeral home just does that for the Star Tribune obituary, and my funeral home will do it for free on their website. Okay, that $500 could be used for more food, right? Or, you know, if you've put $300-400 aside for flowers, and, you know, you learn that your church is going to pay for the whole thing, or however it works out, you could use that money for something else in the funeral. Or if the funeral doesn't, if that money doesn't get used, the money actually goes back into your estate and eventually returned to your kids. Okay? So back to this, when you come to the funeral home, you'll get, you know, the Final Wishes organizer is going to start out as something that just has a lot of brochures and a price list in it. But when you sit down and fill out your memorial guide and decide how much money you want for X, Y, and Z, then that will come back to you with all of your final wishes in one place. And, you know, when you prearrange, you don't have to come to the funeral home with every single detail hammered out. You just want a basic plan of attack. You want to get that funded, take that burden off of your kids, and then know that me, for example, I would be your funeral guy, and we would be your funeral home, you know, for the rest of your life. So if you wanted to put into your final wishes, hey, I was watching The Notebook, and I don't want that at my funeral, or I was at my friend's funeral and I want that. You can keep putting notes into the file so all of your final wishes are in one place. So it's an ongoing process, but I'd encourage all of you to, you know, go see your local funeral home and do something like that. So, any questions? And don't feel awkward. This is actually my favorite part of the night.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Whether I die at home or die at a hospital or die at a community center or an adult I'm there, what do we do when I die? Does my wife call you? Do you come and get my body?
So what he's asking is when he passes away and you have a prearrangement in place, right?
I'm sorry.
So when you pass away,
Yes.
and in this scenario, do you have a prearrangement in place? You don't right now, but I guess whether you have a pre-arrangement in place or you don't, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to call, you want to call the police or 911, right? And the dispatch person will decide, was this mysterious circumstances? Was this foul play? Do we need to get the coroner involved? And if they're like, no, that's fine, then you call your funeral home, and your funeral home will come and remove your remains from your place of death.
So you would come to wherever I am and
Yeah.
the funeral, or do we have to provide service to get it?
No. Funeral homes have a removal team. So if you pass away in your house, in a dignified way, they'll come to your house and remove you. If you pass away at a hospital, nursing home, senior living center, the funeral home will come and get you.
And what's the time on this usually?
That varies. I get the first call forms, every day, and I look at those, and you'll see notes on there. You'll see a lot of times family isn't ready. Perhaps you passed away in your recliner or something, and the family just wants to spend a couple hours or half a day with you or whatever. The family will be, the funeral home will be respectful of those wishes. Okay? Did that answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned, with the viewing, like the open casket.
Uh-huh.
You mentioned something about it being just for family,
Yes.
cremation versus a public viewing.
Yes.
So is that about embalming and everything was just the family, like a few days after? I kind of lost you when you were talking about it.
Yeah, so she was asking about the private family viewing, all right? The opportunity for immediate friends and family to spend, up to an hour with their loved one. She was asking if they embalm in that process. They do not.
So is that just like a few days after?
Yeah, it's usually 24 to 36 hours. It's for closure. Yeah. So no embalming. The body is just washed and disinfected. If the family would like to bring in some clothes, we can dress your loved one for you. And then, funeral homes have multiple arrangement rooms. Usually they just kind of move the tables out and they make them into a small visitation room where your loved one is just, displayed on a stretcher with a blanket over them.
I see.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Our cemetery is in Waseca, in southern Minnesota.
Okay.
Is there an extra charge for the hearse to take us from here down to Waseca?
So you passed away here and you've had your funeral here, and then you want to be buried either with a procession from church or the next day?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a charge. I mean, Washburn-McReavy, again, the company that I work for, they'll include anything within 30 miles of the Twin Cities Metro, but if they needed to get you to Waseca, I think,
9 miles.
I believe it's $1, maybe $1.50 at the most per mile, one way. But yes, they absolutely will do that.
We inherited land, we inherited the third plot. I had by my brother and sister out.
Okay, so you,
It was already there.
so you have a third plot, so you have one plot for the two of you.
Two cremains.
And we checked it out at a family funeral with them down there, and the cemetery does allow it.
Most of them do. Most of them do. The four Washburn-McReavy cemeteries, Glen Haven, Don Valley, Hillside, and Crystal Lake. Most cemeteries have have a policy called a second right of interment. And a second right of interment usually costs half the price of the current cost of the grave. So at most cemeteries, two people can go into one plot, whether it's a casket and an urn on top of that, or an urn and an urn. But usually there's a second right of interment. It's half the price of the current cost of the grave. At Glen Haven, for example, if you owned a plot and the current value of it was $2,500, you would need to pay $1,250 to have the right to bury there and have that recorded there for the rest of time. And just for the head scratchers, and I used to be one of those, if you've ever thought to yourself, oh, I'll just sneak, another urn into the vault when we bury mom, or we'll slip an urn into a casket. We have cemeteries have no way of knowing that, and that's not illegal or wrong, but it can't be recorded there. So sometimes families can be shocked when they learn, hey, we want to put a headstone here, and we want to have, Bill and Margaret, and the cemetery is going to say, well, we can't put Margaret's name on there because there is no second right of interment. Technically, this didn't happen. So, yes, sir.
We were told at the time that to open a grave down there is $1,400 a throw.
Uh-huh.
So we'd have to ask if there's a second on that, because second.
Yeah, you would have to ask if there was a second right of interment. And also, some families will choose to save some money by holding on to one urn until the second person goes, and then you only have to pay that open and closing fee once. But again, so many of these things, you don't want to look at them from a financial standpoint and a money coupon clipping. I'm a coupon clipper. You gotta think like if my wife died first, would I be okay with not seeing, her urn going into the niche or the grave? Or would I need that for closure? Or vice versa. So as couples, make sure and discuss those things with each other as well. So, love this guy. 3 questions. I love it.
In some family funerals where they have been cremated, they've gotten very creative with what the ashes are put into.
Uh-huh.
I have a couple of ideas.
Yes.
If they're big enough. I have a 57 Corvette cookie jar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would be large enough.
Yeah.
Also, I have a jewelry box I made in 8th grade that might be big enough too. Is there a problem with that kind of stuff?
Absolutely not. So he's asking, do I have to purchase the urn that the funeral home has in their inventory? Do I have to purchase the casket that the funeral home is offering? The answer is absolutely 100% no. There's a lot of markup at funeral homes. Yes. And in fact, you're going to go to a funeral home and you're going to see maybe 15, 20 urns there. It's not that much of a selection. You're going to be like, this is overpriced, and I'm right with you on that. If you go to Google and literally type in any word and the word urn, you're probably going to find it, and you're probably going to find it a lot cheaper. The only thing that you'll want to do is, most cemeteries require, if you're buried in the ground and cremated, that you go inside an urn vault. You're familiar with casket vaults, right? Okay, well, there's a smaller one for urns, and they're really there just to protect, any lawnmowers that drive over things, or erosion and people sinking into graves and so on and so forth. Yes, it happens. And the urn vault protects the deceased from those kinds of things. So you'd want to make sure that this 57 Chevy, you said? Corvette, 57 Corvette cookie jar fits into one of those vaults. In fact, my wife's grandfather, he was buried out at Fort Snelling, and he was buried in his tackle box that he got as an 8-year-old boy. All rusty, beat up from the 1930s, and it was emotional. It was awesome. I want to bring up something here too. Mike, our veteran here. For anybody that has veterans in their family, the VA is absolutely wonderful with taking care of those who served. What they're not so great at is reaching out to you while you're living and telling you what you have and what you get, right? For veterans, anything in a national cemetery like Fort Snelling, everything within the cemetery gates is free for the veteran and their spouse, and if there was a vulnerable child that they had claimed as a dependent, they would get a burial plot. Those are usually about $2,500. That's free for the veteran and his spouse. the concrete burial vault, which ranges anywhere between, $1,500 and the Michael Jackson one at $20,000. That $2,000 or $1,200 open and close fee is waived for the veteran. And the markers, the headstones, which range from $1,000 to $1 million, those are complimentary for the veterans as well. But you want to make sure that the funeral home has your DD 214 form on file, because then the funeral home goes to bat for you, right? They go to bat for you. They arrange the burial flag. They arrange the rifle volley, the honor guard. They'll help you schedule out at Fort Snelling and make sure you've secured all those rights and save your family the money that's well deserved. Any other questions? Yes, Sheila.
With cremation,
Uh-huh.
the ashes to ashes and dust to dust, I've always been a little worried that is there something wrong with turning yourself to ashes before God does?
Pastor, come on down. She's wondering about the spiritual aspects of cremation.
About being turned to ashes before God turns you to ashes.
Is that okay from
Yeah,
Scripture?
that's why this is kind of bothers me.
God does want us to take, and, we should treat the bodies that we're in with respect, okay? But once death happens, our bodies are enlivened by our soul, okay? And when death happens, the soul leaves the body, goes to be with God. Your body is no more alive than at that point than, this pew is, okay? And what does God say? Adam, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, right?
But then it's like later he says, you'll rise.
Right, right.
Then if you don't have anything to rise.
Remember that when Jesus says, the time is coming when all the dead who are in their grave will hear the voice of the Son of Man and they will come out. So Jesus, when he returns, is going to perform a miracle and reconstitute everyone's body who has ever lived. And think of people like sailors who, or things where there's war or whatever, stuff that no one's found, okay, things like that. But that's not going to stop God's almighty power. So long as you're, doing this in a respectful way, which you would be, and you're not doing it to try to take and say, well, God's never going to find me or never going to get, reconstitute me, well, then you wouldn't want to. But if you're doing it just in a respectful way, take and manage your finances and also do it in a way that respects your wishes and your family's wishes, that's perfectly fine before the Lord. So don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Yes.
I have two questions. One is about the stone, too. I mean, in the funerals I've been involved with, that's taken care of by the cemetery, in terms of what's put on the stone and how much it costs and that kind of thing. Is that something that the funeral home takes care of, the stone or marker?
So you're asking about the gravestones, and are you asking if that's something that the funeral home takes care of?
Yeah, what kind of, it's the same as an urn, they ask you what kind of marker do you want, and so.
So that really, so she's asking, do the cemeteries and the funeral homes have, do they? Yeah. So every cemetery is different. You're going to have your large cemeteries like, Lakewood and Glen Haven and Gethsemane. They're going to have office staff with, working throughout the week and policies in place, and it will vary from, cemetery to cemetery. I'm helping a gal with a prearrangement right now, and they had went off and got a gravestone, a flat granite marker on their own for this gal's mother and father-in-law. And they shouldn't have ordered it ahead of time without knowing what the cemetery's requirements were, but they did. And I called Shakopee Catholic Cemetery, where they were, and I called the manager, and I just asked, because this guy wanted to just go out there with a shovel and put it in himself. Cemeteries don't allow that. What I found out at that cemetery, yes, that was fine. But you do need to have a professional come out and install it. So I helped procure someone from my network that they approved to go out and do that for about $400. I can answer at at Glen Haven Cemetery, where I work, that one is anybody been out to Glen Haven, I think? Okay, so Glen Haven is a flat bronze on granite cemetery. So at our cemetery, every individual marker is going to be a 24 by 14 on a 28 by 18 piece of granite. The companion stones are going to be 36 by 13. If it's a companion stone where two people are in one grave, it's going to be, come on, Eric, you got this. 24. Well, it's vertical. it's vertical, but so some cemeteries have their parameters, some don't. I'm encouraging my parents right now they retired to the Manitowoc, Green Bay, Wisconsin area, and they're doing a pre-arrangement right now, and I'm like, I need you guys to find out what your cemetery, their requirements are and what their open and close is so you can put that in. And they're getting, it's St. Petrie Lutheran Cemetery on the middle of nowhere, County Road, whatever, in Theresa, Wisconsin. So they said at that cemetery, there is no open and close fees, and you go out and dig your own grave. So that's something my brother and I are going to do. Yeah, we're going to go out and do that, and that's just how that's going to go. But, at Glen Haven, you're going to need at least a $320 concreter and vault, and the open and close fee of $1,200. So it's different everywhere, yeah.
In our case, our stone is there,
Mm-hmm.
and we bought the monument in Owatonna through the fair.
Yeah?
And you can have, their policy is you can have as much as you want on the stone for one price, and we put our kids' names and everything. It's gonna cost us $240 a throw to put our, as they call it, end dates on it.
How much?
240.
That's right. At Glen Haven, it's going to be about $295 for a bronze one. And to kind of piggyback on my ADHD, I don't take my Adderall after 5 o'clock. You can, at Glen Haven at least, you can put anything you want on that stone that fits. We really just have size packages. It's a little more if you want the bronze to be another color outside of brown and dark brown, but yeah, you can get really creative with that thing.
So just so I'm clear, the things that belong to, the cemetery to decide and what funeral home provides, so the coffin and the vault are on the funeral home side, and then
Yeah.
the cemetery takes care of, the digging of the grave,
Yep.
stone,
Yep.
and any kind of flower arrange. I know there's vases like in the acacia. They have vases for my parents.
Mm-hmm.
Vase, and then if they're buried in proximity, then they have room for the wife and the husband, and they do.
Mm-hmm.
But that was all carried out through them. So there was a second meeting I had with
Yeah.
them. So then there's more to it just than the funeral thing. You have to
Right.
cemetery people.
Right. So
Does that work then?
basically, a key takeaway here tonight is that the funeral home and the cemetery are two completely different businesses, right? Like when you do a pre-arrangement, if you want to put money in there for a gravestone and combine that into your single pay or your monthly payment program, you can do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so
But
that's
yeah,
what I was wondering, is like, how does that work then between the two entities?
Yeah.
So looking at the pre-need policy,
yeah,
in terms of who gets what and what's
yeah.
paid where.
I see that happen all the time because, someone will have just spent 4 or 5 hours in the office with the funeral director and they just cut a check for $15,000, $16,000 for the funeral. They're like, Eric, they're ready for you. And they're like, all right, this will just be quick. We just gotta get her in the ground and we'll get out of here in about 20 minutes. And then when they learn, do they have a plot? No, we'll quick look at those. All right, so then we go buy a plot and they're blown away by how much that costs. And then we tell them, and it's going to be another $2,000 to open and close. What? And I at Washburn-McReavy, for example, the funeral home bills and the cemetery bills are two different businesses under the Washburn-McReavy umbrella. So what am I trying to say? Collaborate, is that what we said? It's two separate bills. It's gonna be two separate bills for the cemetery and the funeral home side.
Yeah, it's just that as a family member, I didn't really keep that straight.
Mm-hmm.
Because what in the funeral home in this case helped, in terms of looking at what entity does what.
Mm-hmm.
And so the pre-need is just, how does that money get dispersed then to those? And how does the family know that, and
Yeah. Well, in a perfect scenario, I would have you come and see me, and we'd talk about your cemetery needs first. And I would say, all right, you don't have a plot yet. All right, let's go get you a plot. Let's get you a plot. It's going to cost $2,000 to open and close this thing. All right, so let's pay for the plot. Do you want to pay for the marker right now? Well, I'll lock in today's prices if I do that. Yeah, so let's do that. All right, so now we've just, wrote up a cemetery contract, and we've completed that. And then we'd walk over, and I'd pull out my computer, and we'd begin a pre-arrangement where we would set up your funeral, and I would just, I'd put the vault on the funeral home side of things. I would put the open and close into the funeral pre-need, and I'll really just help set your family up for when they come to the funeral home. They really don't have any expenses unless they want to add them themselves.
And so how do you work it with a cemetery that's not associated with your business? Do you do the same thing, work with them?
Well, I mean, we bury people at Glenhaven all the time that are at Geardy Delmore, Anderson Funeral Home, so on and so forth. I mean, if they have a pre-arrangement, they work that out on their end, and then they call me up and they schedule the burial, and if they haven't put money aside for that kind of stuff for pre-need, then the family needs to come over and see the cemetery and pay those things.
Okay, so the family still takes care of those, you don't coordinate that?
Yeah.
The family does?
Yes.
Make sure that the money gets sorted?
Right.
So just want to make sure.
No, these are good questions, and these questions are all awesome. These are all awesome. My managers told me not to open. They'll encourage you not to open up for Q&A at the end of these because you might lose certain people on certain things, and everyone's answers are kind of different for everybody. I love Q&A so much. I do it, and this was awesome. So the next step really is to come see me or go see a pre-arrangement specialist at your family's traditional funeral home, and sit down and get these individual questions answered for your individual and your individual and intimate needs. Does that make sense? All right. Yes. The average cremation or the average cremation with a funeral service? So, okay. So there are two basic ways to go about cremation. There's a direct and simple cremation, which is exactly what it sounds. We take your loved one into our care, have a private family viewing if your family chooses a private family viewing. We perform the cremation. Your loved one comes and picks up the remains, and then the funeral side of things is really do-it-yourself at that point. The hand-holding ends at that point. That's a direct and simple cremation, and that's $2,995. Now, we offer the most popular cremation package is the cremation with a 1-hour visitation and a memorial. All right, so with that, you can either have control of the chapel, one of the Washburn, one of the funeral, any funeral chapel, 1-hour visitation and a funeral service, and be able to use their facility for a reception. All right, those start at $41.95. And if you choose to have your service at the church, that would include funeral staff, funeral directors coming over to the church, bringing all the flowers, bringing all the food, bringing everything over here, assisting the pastor, assisting the ladies' aid, and directing. It includes both. Okay. All right. I've taken up too much of your time here tonight. I want to thank you guys all for coming, and you guys all have my card. If you guys could just leave the forms that you filled out on the bench, on the pews, I will come and pick those up. I'll hang out here for maybe 15, 20 more minutes if anybody else have any more questions, but we'll release the rest of you. And Pastor, I'd love to have you close this in prayer.
Sure. Lord God, Heavenly Father, we thank you for giving us this day, now drawing to a close. We pray that you would continue to bless us and be with us. Give us peace tonight through the forgiveness of sins we have in your Son. And grant, Lord, that the peace we have in Jesus and that hope of the resurrection be ours for ourselves and ours to share and testify for our family as well. Grant these things for our Lord Jesus' sake.
Amen.